All right, happy Friday, everyone. This is our first Excel Friday. This will be our normal routine for Fridays. We'll be doing this for several Fridays. I'll say more often than not on Fridays, I'll have our Excel Friday. And let's be honest, Fridays are great on their own. Excel Friday just adds to that. Excel Friday is just a step above that. So if you haven't done so already, there's an Excel sample dataset one from Brightspace. Go ahead and download that. Just as a note, I do have, I'm going to continue putting the data sets up, but I may update them beforehand. I was noticing on the data sets that I had uploaded, I made some changes to it right before class. One had a professor who's no longer at the university. Did anybody get a chance to ever hang out with Dr. Shaniwa? Dr. Shaniwa was really, really cool, but yeah, he's gone now. So we're gonna let his memory rest, and I'm not gonna tease him anymore. But I've made an adjustment to that. I also noticed it says spring 2024, which we're in fall 2024, so I had to make that adjustment as well. But let's go ahead and let's set the stage for talking about this. We talked about it last week on Friday. I want to give you some advice regarding these Excel Fridays. First of all, this is for your benefit. I'm not doing this to directly test you on it. Like there's no assignments associated with this. There will be test questions, and we will talk about that as we get closer to the exam. The test questions are not difficult as long as you follow the routine that we go through and make sure you ask questions whenever you're confused or not sure about something. I will try to go about this at a pretty reasonable pace. That being said, there are certain things I do in Excel, now having worked in Excel for going on 30 years, that I do without thinking. And so if I run a task and you're like, how did he do that? Stop, raise a hand and say, can you repeat how you did that? Show us how to do that. One thing that I know that I do that people kind of confuses, and this has come up in previous classes, is that all of a sudden you'll start seeing me do that. And people say, how did you do that without hitting the Zoom button, Dr. Barnes? Does anybody know how that's done, by the way? So if you want to zoom in without actually doing the zoom bar down here, you can actually hold control and then scroll the mouse button. Not the mouse wheel, I should say. The mouse wheel will actually allow you to do that. I do that without thinking nowadays because I've done that so frequently. So if something like that comes up, if you see me do something and you're curious about how I did it, because I do use a lot of shortcuts. It's very weird because certain shortcuts I've adopted and other shortcuts I've just never been able to use. So that brings up something I said last week. I said there are multiple ways to do the same task. And just because I do something one way does not mean you are restricted in that. I will try to avoid asking any questions on the exams that are specific to the way that I do things. I'm not going to ask you about what is the percentage of doing. There may be multiple ways. That being said, if you're curious about that, again, curious about anything I do, feel free to ask. Or if you want to say, can you do it this way also, I'll explore that with you. Probably the most important piece of advice I can give you with anything that you do, this is with any technology tool, any data analytics tool, is become very good about learning how to search on the internet. Your biggest resource available to you is going to be the internet because I'm just one person and the advice I can give you is limited to what's in my brain. And that is constantly decreasing on a daily basis as I get older, right? I still consider myself a pretty intelligent person, but I will tell you that I'm not as intelligent as the collective information superhighway, all that data that's out there. One of the ways that I've learned how to do a lot of these technology tools is that I've learned how to do web searches and try to find out specific information about things that I need to know how to do. This is going to be true for Excel, but it's also true for any other program you use. There's a lot you can learn out there. YouTube is a very, very good tool. You can actually walk through step-by-step scenarios of anything that you want to learn about. Pretty much. Maybe there's a few nuanced situations. But I would get very, very custom and acclimated to doing that in any classes that you're doing because it's very important. All right. So today we're going to talk about some very basic functions. We're going to talk about some things that you probably know. I'd say if you don't know 100% of what I'm going to talk about here, you're probably close to it. You're probably going to be close to it. And again, the goal here is not to repeat and reiterate things that you don't know or that you already know. We will get to more challenging tasks, but I do want to integrate some of this and show you how it would work in the real world. This is kind of an example of this. You will see that this is a very specifically formatted Excel tab. When I download the class rosters at the beginning of the semester, this is how they look. Now, obviously, the names are a little bit different. First of all, I'm not going to put your banner IDs up here. I will probably refrain from putting anybody's in this class name up here. That goes to an unfortunate incident that occurred a year ago where I put up student names in the class. And then I put up email addresses that were not theirs. I put up completely different email addresses. And then YouTube accused me of cyberbullying. And so, that was a running gag that I had for the entire semesters that apparently I'm a cyberbully. So I'm going to try to avoid putting up anybody's name in this class, just to be a little bit more conscious about it. It's a new world we're living in, guys. So I will try to avoid doing that. That being said, given that this is information that's publicly available on the Truman internet that you can actually find on the Truman website, I'm not too sad about that. I don't know what everybody's middle name is, so I just use character names from Harry Potter. And you may say, why do you say Dr. Caden is Voldemort? And I say, if you know Dr. Caden, you know why I said she's Voldemort. Okay, yeah. So let's go ahead and put some of this stuff in context. Now, again, most of this is going to be pretty straightforward, pretty easy, but we want to actually contextualize how we would use this in an actual scenario. And this is how I would use some of these functions in reality, and I have, in fact. So you'll notice I've got two sheets that are associated with this, and one of these sheets has got data in it. It's got banner IDs. Now, we can pull this information pretty straightforward. We could use just a VLOOKUP to do that, and we will in the future. But for right now, we're going to say, since we know what the organization of this is, it's alphabetical order according to banner ID, we're just going to copy information over. So we've talked about this last week. Let's just go ahead and copy this information. We're going to highlight our names here, and we're just going to copy and paste this. So obviously, there's a few issues here. First of all, I copied across the entire format, which is probably not something I want to do. I don't want to cut those bold lines or the bold type. So I'm going to kind of redo this according to what we know. So this is just going to be if you just did a highlight, copy, paste, Control C, Control V. This is what it would look like. And if you don't care about the format, that's fine. All right. I will tell you, I do care about the format. That's one of the things about being OCD is that I could not handle this being in my spreadsheet. I bless those of you who do not care that. Like if you're just kind of like, oh, I'm kind of fine with that. I'm kind of fine with some of them have borders and some of them don't. It's a good thing to be you, because if I saw this in a spreadsheet, I could not ignore it. I would have to edit it somehow. So let's just go ahead and back up and let's go ahead and paste this in so that it does not retain that format. So as we know, we talked about this during the Excel quiz. We're just going to paste values, and that way we paste over information without the format. Now you'll notice that Scott Templeton here is kind of impeding on the borders, but we'll fix that here in just a second. We'll do some formatting tasks here in just a little bit. All right, so with that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about what I would do if I was working on this in reality. So this is kind of how I would set up a spreadsheet if I was going to be doing calculations. And it's going to be a little bit more complex than this, what I do in reality. This is a very simplified version because we've only got 3 homework. But I've got a subtotal here, which I want to know, what is the subtotal of all the homework assignments? Like, what is my subtotal? And again, this is a function, probably one of the very first functions you'll learn how to do in Excel. You may have known how to do it before Business 153. This is going to be our sum function. So sum, and then we're going to pick up all these right here and sum them together. Now, the reason I did the sum function is not to teach you that, because I know that everybody knows how to do the sum function. But there are a couple of things that I want to talk about, why we use the sum function and basically what steps that I walk through. So first of all, you'll notice when I did that, most of the times when people do the sum function, they just highlight and just use their mouse to highlight. But when I was doing that, you'll notice I said equals, I opened parentheses, and then I went over here, and I'm using my keyboard to do this, and I was able to highlight with the keyboard. What did I hold down when I was highlighting? Does anybody know? So you can do control if you're doing individual references. For this one, I use shift. So basically, all I did is I started at D2, held down the shift key, and then pressed to the right so I could highlight that. Now, if I do the control key, the control would be really good if I wanted to highlight disparate cells. I wanted to highlight disparate information and put all that in there. But since I want to work with everything that's within an array, I'm just going to use the shift key to do that, or you can select it with the mouse to do that as well. All right, so there's our sum. And another interesting point about why we use the sum function is that could I just come up here and could I just say, well, I know that I want this one together or these together, so I'm just going to add all those together. That's effectively the same function, right? Effectively, it is. What is the advantage of using the sum function or the sum formula? So what if I have a homework assignment that I want to drop right in the middle here? Like I want to insert, I want to put a homework assignment here. The sum function will actually capture that, okay? So if I put in another 10 here, oh, it's 4, 10 here, you'll notice the sum function updates because it actually captures everything in that array. if I use those exact inputs that I was talking about just a second ago, so let's see, let's go back here. If I did the exact inputs, the formula equals that, plus that, plus that. When I add a new cell or add a new column, it's not going to pick up that new column in this calculation, which is a very, very minor thing. It's a very, very minor detail, but it's a very important one because we would like our spreadsheets to be as adaptive as possible so we don't have to constantly edit them. All right, so we've got our sum formula, and we can actually use the sum formula. Well, the best thing about Excel, one of the best things about Excel is that we can enter piece of information one time and not have to repeat it. And I cannot stress how important this is. Has anybody taken 303, accounting 303? You remember those amortization tables that you had to do in accounting 303? Those are misery, right? You had to write every single line out. So I've got to do the interest calculation, and then I've got to do the deduction, and then I've started. I got to do it all over again. We'll do it like 4 or 5 times. In a real amortization, we're probably talking about somewhere between 30 and 360 periods. Can you imagine writing out 360 rows of an amortization table, doing a 30-year amortization on a house? Yeah, that would be a semester-long project, literally right there. Okay, you'd be writing the entire semester long. So the great thing about Excel is if you set up the formulas, that you can actually just kind of pick that out and just drop that down real easily. Now, what is that called? Why are we able to do that in Excel? Why are we able to take one formula and apply it to multiple cells? What is that concept called? Relative cell references. Okay, so it's going to look and it's going to say, all right, here's my formula D2 and F2, and if I copy this down, it's going to say, I'm going to adapt this formula with the rows changed to whatever the new row is. So instead, when I copy that down, it's going to go D3, D4, D5, D6, and this actually works both directions as well. If you move to the right or the left, it will actually change those relative cell references. Now, relative cell references, as I'm fond of saying, are both a major blessing and a massive curse. Because there will be times when the relative cell references will be your best friend, and there'll be times when they're your worst enemy. We will talk a little bit later in this course about how we actually manipulate cell references. You do need to know how to make absolute cell references, which is where a cell reference will not change. You will need to know how to do partial absolute, which is basically one area of the cell stays the same where others are changing. Once you become a master of that, then basically Excel is your playground. But until you learn how to do that, it becomes very challenging because there will be times that you'll copy something and you don't want it to actually copy the relatively, you want it to stay in one spot. Again, don't worry too much about that now. We will talk about that more. I'm sure you're probably familiar with how to do that already, but we'll talk about some approaches for using that. All right, so if we're going to copy this information down, there's a couple ways we can do it. We can just do Control-C, Control-V and do that. We can also highlight arrange and copy it all directly. Or some of you may have noticed that I got my cell up here and there's a little piece of black, and it's very hard for me to see because I'm old, okay? But for you guys, you can probably see that little black nook that's in the cell. If you double click on that, it copies it down. Does anybody know what that's called? Yes. Autofill? Yeah, autofill or flash fill, one of the two. You can actually do that. Now, it's very helpful to get to use that. I will say it does have limitations. In order to be able to use autofill, you do need to have data on either side of the column or the columns you're trying to fill, like either F or H needs to have data in it if we're going to use autofill in column G. You can use autofill also directionally if you use it vertically, but again, same constraint is held. You had to have data immediately above or below it. So autofill does have limitations. It will come up if you try to use an autofill and there's no immediately surrounding data, then you'll just have to do this copy and paste the way you normally would. Okay, so yeah, we got our subtotal here and we got everything set up. Let's go ahead and set up a very quick total because we got an extra credit assignment. So let's go ahead and just do a very simple formula here. And we'll use autofill to fill that in. So nothing too profound yet, nothing too profound. Before we move on to the next step, one thing I would like to encourage everybody to get in the habit of is making sure that your Excel spreadsheets look presentable. Now, there's a bug up here. I apologize, I'm not just throwing my hand up at random. This is something that you may not find as a need for as much at the college level, but it will become very important at the professional level. Once you go into the real world, the quality of your Excel spreadsheets and your presentation will be you'll be judged on those. So it's very, very good to at least take a little bit of time to make things look good and make it look consistent. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and do some rudimentary formatting. So we're going to go ahead and highlight these at the top, and we're going to bold them. Which you can click on the bold tab, or you can hit Control B. Those are also shortcuts that you may use frequently. So you've got bold, italicize, and underline, which are Control B, Control U, Control I, which work really well. I don't use those nearly as frequently as Control C, Control X, Control V, but I still use them pretty frequently. Then we can center those, which I center up here. I honestly don't know what the shortcut is for centering. That's one of the ones that I never learned, but we're going to center those. And let's just go ahead and let's fix all of these columns so that they're actually at width they need to be. Because again, we're cutting off Templeton right here. We need to fix that. We mentioned this on Friday. We have the keystone here where we can highlight the entire spreadsheet. So you click on that, it will highlight the entire spreadsheet. Then we're just going to double click on any one of these columns, but it will actually affect all the columns. It'll fix all of them for us. That's kind of a nice little feature. And then let's go ahead and change the tab title as well. So there's a couple ways you can go about changing the tab title. You can double click it. You can also, if you want to just be fancy, you can right click and say rename. The only reason the right click is relevant is because there's actually a number of different features that things that you can do through the right click on the tab that will be relevant, but we'll talk about more of those later on. So let's just change this to gradebook. Or grade rule in my case. Oops. See, that is the problem with getting older, is the typos become more and more frequent. There's a professor that was here. He left right around the middle of the pandemic. He retired around the time. But he was here for my first, I guess, 5 years when I was here. And he was an older gentleman who was not very technologically savvy. And whenever he taught anything that was online, he would like type stuff out, and every other word there would be a massive typo in there. And fortunately, Excel or Word would correct most of those typos, and you go back and fix them. And I used to tease him very, very thoroughly about the number of typos he had. And now I'm the one committing those typos. Okay, so what comes around goes around, or goes around comes around, whatever the term is. Yeah. So we're going to come back to this, but let's just go ahead and let's look at sheet 2 real quick. Now, sheet 2 is blank. All right, sheet 2 is blank, but it is existing for a reason. And we'll talk about some delete mechanisms. So deleting data obviously is really, really, it's something that you will need to do, but you need to be very, very careful about how you approach it. So here's what I want you to do. I just want you to type in 1, 2, 3 right there to column A. And there are some different ways that we can delete information. And we need to be careful with all of them, because deleting it's not necessarily permanent, except in some situations, but we'll talk about that in a second. So the first thing that you're probably going to come into quite frequently is just deleting data out, where you don't need to format anything, you don't need to change anything, you just want the data gone, all right? So you highlight and you just hit delete, the delete key. So that's the first thing. That just deletes anything without changing the format of the spreadsheet or the worksheet that you're working with. Now, there may come in situations where you don't want to delete all the information, you just want to delete a certain piece of information. Well, you can do that. But let's say that we want to actually fully get rid of the data that's in a certain column or row. So in that case, I'm going to highlight row number 2, and I'm right click, and I'm going to hit delete. This is different from deleting the data, because this is telling the spreadsheet, I want this row gone. Okay, I don't want the data gone, I want the row gone. So I'm going to hit delete, and you will notice that the row itself is gone. It's actually changed the format of the spreadsheet. Now, the other piece of deletion I want to tell you about, and this is a really critical one, and I'm going to preface this by saying learn from my mistakes and don't make the same mistakes I do. This is deleting data in a worksheet, or deleting the worksheet itself. So if you right click here, you'll notice there's an option to delete that. Okay, so let's go ahead and do it. And what Excel is going to say is, are you absolutely sure about this? Why do I say don't make mistakes? Because you do need to be absolutely sure before you do this, because there have been times, multiple times in my career, that I've said, yes, I'm absolutely sure. Shut up, Excel. I know what I'm doing. And then I said, immediately after I deleted the worksheet, saying, oh no, I needed that worksheet. So it's a lot of work to go back and fix the problem. So be very, very certain when you go to delete this. And if you never run into this problem in your career, congratulations. It will save you a lot of headache and a lot of misery. If it does happen, you're going to remember this. You're going to say, Dr. Barnes told me. Yeah, you're going to remember that. You'll hear my voice in your head. And then I apologize. I feel sympathy for you, because I've done it many times. Maybe not many times, but I could probably count it on one hand. But those times are very stark and memorable in my memory, because it was hours of work afterwards. All right. Well, we do know that we want this one, so we can actually say delete, and the worksheet's gone, okay? So those are kind of some delete functions you need to be aware of. They do encompass different delete types, but it's important to understand the difference between those. I think the last things we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about some formatting features. So one of my favorite ones has to do with how to freeze data within a spreadsheet, because this spreadsheet is very easy. It's 6 rows and 9 columns, so it's all visible on one screen. Is that going to be every spreadsheet you deal with? It's going to be all visible on one screen? I suppose if you scroll down small enough, it's all visible, you know. But yeah, for the most part, it's not readable if you do that. So what happens if we want to see everything that's on the screen, but we want to retain at least some integrity? Like, say, for example, we want to be able to see all the items that are below this, like there's, let's say, 50 or 60 items, but we need this first row to be able to reference what this represents. Well, this is something called freeze panes, and it's pretty straightforward. If you go over to View, you'll notice something called freeze panes. Not now. And freeze panes gives you a few options, okay? It gives you a function called freeze panes, which we're going to talk about what that means here in just a second, how it's different from the others. And then we've got freeze top row. This is going to be the first one we're going to learn. So we're going to say the first row is our titles. We would like to have reference to that. So we click on that, and sure enough, this is frozen now. So when we scroll down, it retains that first row. Similarly, we can unfreeze panes, and we can do the same thing for the first column, which allows us to move to the right and retain that first column. Now, the interesting question comes in, what if we need to freeze more than one row or more than one column? Or perhaps we need to freeze both rows and columns. That's where freeze panes come in. And this is what I most frequently use. It's very, very useful if you know how to do it. It's something that, so by the way, these next 2 things I'm going to talk about, I want to hold everybody in this room to secrecy, okay? These are not complex things to know how to do, but if you actually show them to somebody who doesn't know how to do it, use Excel very well, they'll be like, oh, that's really cool. How did you do that? You need to tell them, it's advanced stuff. It's really, really hard to explain, okay? Even though this is really, really simple about what I'm about to teach you, you need to hold it to secrecy, because if the secret gets out that some of the stuff that I'm about to teach you is so simple, then our mystique is gone, okay? And then accountants and business people, we're useless anymore, because anybody can do it, all right? So you've got to make sure that you don't tell anybody this, okay? Got to make sure. Is everybody held to secrecy on this one? Okay. If somebody betrays me out there, I will find out, okay? I will find out. So let's talk about freezing. So let's go ahead and click on cell D2. So first point, how it works. I want to freeze my top row and then my first 3 columns. And I want to see banner ID plus the full name. So let's go ahead and click on that cell, and I want you to go to freeze panes, and I want you to click on freeze panes. And what that does is saying, all right, I'm going to freeze anything that's above this and to the left. And if you do that, all of a sudden you'll notice that you freeze panes, and you can scroll around and retain those first 3 columns in that first row. That was really, really easy, I know, and you're just going to be kind of like saying, that's so simple, Dr. Barnes. This is a waste of my tuition. And I say, you're probably not wrong, okay? But trust me when I say that people will be super impressed by something like this if they don't know how to do it, okay? And again, don't tell them, because if they learn the secrets, then we're done for. We're done for. Another one that I really like using is conditional formatting. So you will notice over here, actually, first of all, let me talk about this. So one thing I would recommend that you get in the habit of as well, especially when you're doing dynamic spreadsheets, you need to be able to identify what information within a spreadsheet is manually input and what information is formulas. And this is pretty simple. One thing I like doing is if I have formulas, I like delineating those from the manual inputs. So let's go ahead and go to home and just click on the highlight there. And basically all that's saying is everything else is manually input, but these represent formulas that are calculated based on other information within the spreadsheet. By the way, you notice that I highlighted one and then I was able to highlight another one simultaneously. That is another use of the control key, because you can just basically highlight one series. Hold down control, you can highlight a completely different series. If you're doing something like highlighting, then this is actually an easy way to do it if you're doing it across multiple rows and multiple columns. All right, so we'll notice over here that in total, that most of everybody's doing pretty well in the class, except we got one student who's kind of like falling behind. And we don't like that. We like to follow up with those students and say, what's going on? Is everything okay? All right. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to set up a condition in my spreadsheet where if somebody has got a grade below a certain point, that it kind of jumps out and say, all right, this is something you need to investigate. Now, only 6 students, this is pretty easy visual to do. I can say, all right, well, this one student's the one that's fall behind. But what if you have like 40 students? That's a little bit more challenging, and it's happened in the past. I actually, in one of my classes, my largest class I ever taught was 142 students, and I don't ever want to go back to that, okay? One reason I love Truman is that my largest class here was just above 40 students. So never going back to the 140 student scenario ever again. So let's go ahead and set up a certain situation where that cell will change if a certain condition is met. So we're gonna use conditional formatting for this. And basically conditional formatting, what it tells us is like if it meets a certain rule, then it actually returns a certain response. And this one's gonna be really simple. This one is one that I use most frequently. And again, it's very, very simple and straightforward. Once you learn how to do it, you can show it to other people and other people will be like, wow, that's really cool. So let's go to new rule. And I want you to click on format only cells that it contain. And what I want is I want to format only cells with a cell value less than, I'm going to type in 20. So basically what this is saying is I'm setting a rule. I'm saying if my cell value is less than 20, if the sum of all those numbers is less than 20, in other words, saying I'm going to flag any student that's returned fewer than 20 points. I should use the language correctly. Fewer than 20 points in the course, then I'm going to set up condition. So my favorite condition is set up colors. Now, I've kind of leaned away from this in the past because I have had accessibility issues for students that have color blindness and situations like that. Again, if you're in that situation, you may use a different rule. This is just one that I tend to lean on for myself, which I know by saying that I've cursed myself and that I'm probably going to go blind in the near future. I didn't wear glasses 5 years ago, so there we go with that. But let's go ahead and talk about that. So I'm going to click on format. So I've set my rule, cell value less than 20. I'm going to click on format, and then I'm just going to click on fill. And let's just go ahead and set a warning sign of a red fill. So in other words, if the cell value is going to be less than 20, it's going to be a red fill instead of the normal yellow highlight that I've already set in the cell. Click on that, click OK. Doesn't seem like anything happened. So how do we test this? Let's just go ahead and type in the number 15 here in total. And you'll notice that we now have conditional formatting set for that cell. One of the nice things about conditional formatting is it does also use relative cell references. So if we copy this down, the conditional formatting will copy down as well. And we've now flagged our troublemaker right here that we're going to have to go talk to. All right, any questions on that? Again, this is all fairly routine. I would expect everybody in this room to know most of this, if not all of this. If you feel like you've got a really good grasp on this already, that's good. That means that you're well prepared for the exam. I promise that we are going to cramp up the difficulty as we go by, but I've got to start at a certain point and move from there. These are all things that we would expect you to know by this point. So again, if you feel good about it, great. Okay. You may not have learned something really, really pronounced today, but we had fun doing it. That's the important thing. All right. Let's go ahead and talk about some homework now. So as I said before, some of these homework questions are a little bit cheesy. I do think this is a really good book and it teaches a lot of really important detail. I'm not as fond of the questions, but I do think that it's important for homework. One thing that I try to explain to students is that I'm a big fan of the 3-tiered learning process. So there's like 3 steps in learning. There's the introduction to the content, which is basically what I teach you guys when we talk about it in class, when we go through the slides. There's the reinforcement, the first stage of reinforcement, which is basically when you do your homework and answer questions about it. And then there's the second stage of reinforcement, which is this class session where we actually review the homework questions. This is something I think is really important. It's garnered dividends for me in previous classes. So if it feels like I'm doing something over and over again, I actually literally am doing it over again because I'm trying to make sure that I reinforce things sufficiently so that you're prepared for the exams. All right, so question number 1 says accounting information systems, and this is a pretty straightforward question. So are they always computerized? No, okay. Accounting information systems, oftentimes with really large organizations, and in particular this course, we're going to talk about computer and technology components, but we had accounting information systems well before we had computers. And so conveyance of any type of information can actually be considered a system. And we would say that arguably, that the computer is a smaller part of the system than the individuals who are part of it because the people are ultimately responsible for the conveyance of that information. Report only financial related information. Is that true? So you got to be very, very careful of those absolute statements. Never use absolutes. Never use absolutes. All right. So only financial information. We know that's not true, that it conveys a lot of information. We've seen that in financial statements, and that financial statements that are the product of accounting information systems tend to convey a lot of non-financial information. They tend to contain a lot of qualitative information. Right, are an information system that records, processes, and reports on transactions to provide financial and non-financial information, decision-making, and control. Sounds like a good definition, mostly because it's long, right? But that is a good definition. I would say that that's an accurate definition of everything that we've talked about with respect to AIS. Okay, and to require a CITB designation to understand that may be true in practice, but in theory, no, we don't necessarily need to have that. All right, question 4. The correct order of events in the value chain. So remember the value chain we talked about at the end of the chapter 1 lecture, and I said this is important to understand the sequence that we walked through. And we had our primary activities and our secondary activities, the support activities. But this is actually talking about the primary activities. So what's kind of the first one? It's going to be inbound logistics. We would assume that's the case, and the good news is all the answers have inbound logistics. Maybe that's good news, maybe that's bad news. If it didn't all have inbound logistics, this question would be much easier, okay? But what's our next step? What's our next step? Well, somebody says, I want to buy from you. Then we've got to go through a series of processes in order to be able to meet that demand, okay? Those would be the normal operations of our organization. So we'd say operations would be the next step. And then once we've fulfilled those operations, we're going to send it out to the customer, which would be outbound logistics, okay? So operations, second step, and then outbound logistics, the third step. Ancillary steps after that are going to be marketing and sales. Those are going to flow back into the inbound logistics because the more that we market, the more that we generate sales, the more that we'll be able to ship to customers in the future. So those kind of come after the fact. It's really kind of hard to say that those are sequential because marketing and sales do take place kind of simultaneously with other processes. But for our diagram purposes, we're going to say inbound logistics, operations, outbound logistics, with the other two lingering on the end. Supply chain, supply jewelry chains. All right, we're good. Let's go on to the next question. No, unfortunately, it's not that simple. I always get a kick of it when they just have like silly answers like that because I'm not a serious person, and obviously who wrote this was not a serious person. Refers to the flow of materials, information, payment, and services. So supply chain, is that going to just be to customers or just to vendors, or is this going to be to all stakeholders that are associated with operations of an organization? I would say all stakeholders, okay? So basically, materials, information, payments, and services. Can we say our supply chain extends beyond just our vendors and our customers? Could say probably our supply chain extends to our employees. We could say that there's even stakeholders like governmental entities that relate to that. So anything that's a stakeholder could be affected by the supply chain. And I think this is a pretty good definition. Question number 7. Customer relationship management software does not contain information about. I don't know why I selected this question because basically you had to identify this and says which one does not relate to customers. Okay. So which one does not relate? I guess I should say employees do relate to customers, intuitively speaking, but they are not customers in and of themselves, at least not usually. I guess that's not true. I used to work at McDonald's, and during break, I would go up front and I would buy myself a break meal, so I guess I'm an employee, a customer then, but that's really reaching. That's really reaching that scenario. So we're going to say current employees are not part of the customer relationship management software. Number 10, the balance sheet count most likely affected by AIS investment in supply chain management software would be what? Okay. So supply chain management, what are we talking about? We're talking about just basically what it sounds like, supply chain of the delivery of goods or services to customers. And again, that's going to involve all stakeholders. But ultimately, when we say the words goods and services, what are we talking about? We're talking about the things that generate revenue for the organization. All right. If you're a merchandiser or you're a manufacturer, what form does goods take? What do we call that? Inventory, okay. So is it likely to say that when we talk about that investment in supply chain management would probably be heavily related to inventory? Unless you're specifically talking about a service organization like an accounting firm or a law firm, I think supply chain management would be very heavily invested in inventories. So yeah, A is our answer. Number 12. Customer relationship management software most likely to affect which income statement accounts? Now, there's a different way of thinking about this particular question, okay? Customers are most likely to affect which income statement accounts. So what are customers, what are they generally utilized for within the context of a business? We sell to customers, okay? So they're going to generate sales or revenues for the organization. So if we're talking about customer relationship management, we're trying to basically manage sales. We're trying to improve our sales mechanisms. Now, is it possible you could argue that that affects cost of goods sold and that affects other parts of the income statement? Yes. But what is our primary concern with respect to customers? We need customers if we're going to generate revenues. So that's going to be our focus, C, revenues. An auditor testing internal controls generally be considered to fill which role with respect to accounting information? So this is where I get to ask what the different components are, okay? So the user of an accounting information system is just basically going to be anybody within an organization that has access to that. Manager, those are the executives of the organization who kind of oversee the operations. The designer, that's somebody on the outside who basically says this is how the accounting information system should flow. So what is an evaluator? This is somebody who looks at the information system, tries to determine, is it working the way it should? So which of those is an auditor going to be most likely to fill? The evaluator, yeah, the evaluator. The auditor is basically an external party that comes in and just tries to determine, is this doing what management says it's doing? Because remember, one of the very first things you learned back in 220, management creates these things called financial statements to prove they're doing their job. All right. These financial statements are supposed to be the result and the product of all the operations over a period of time. So we need somebody to come in and say, all right, are these being put together properly? Are these being generated properly? Is management doing its job correctly? That's the role of the auditor. They're evaluating that particular mechanism. Final question in chapter 1, which of these represents the proper transformation of data to decision according to information value chain? All right, so we know that data information are not the same thing. So which is primary? Data. Data is going to be our raw element. And then we're going to convert that to information. The question is, why do we convert data into information? It's because data by itself oftentimes has little to no value. It's not very structured. By converting it to a structure, then we can use that to make better decisions. All right. So how do we do that? Well, when you have more information, you have knowledge, and use that to think about, once you have knowledge, you can make better decisions. Think about that in the context of this particular course. All right. There's a lot of data being thrown out here, but I've structured this data in a meaningful way that you hopefully get information from it. And at the end of a class period, you should feel like, wow, I feel like I'm a little bit smarter than I did. Unless I'm just having an off day and just kind of like, man, Dr. Barnes may be dumber today. And that may happen, okay? That may happen. But for the most part, you should feel like you're a little bit more intelligent at the end of a class period. And what is that going to do? Later on in the course, you're going to take that knowledge that you've gained and you're going to write on the exam and you're going to make decisions with that. Now, I know that's a very, very remedial approach because that's not the way it works in the real world. But I think that's a reasonable application. If I did not transform the data, would you be able to take that approach? Would you be able to do that? Like, let's just say up here, let's just say I took all the words that I was going to use an entire semester and I randomized them. And then I just started throwing those words out in a random order, okay? So I say AIS, auditing, data, you, have, lunch. And I started just randomly spewing out words. Is that data? Absolutely. Is that information? No. And can you do anything with the detail that I provided to you? Maybe, unless you're really, really good at jumble puzzles, maybe you can do that. But for the most part, if I don't structure the data meaningfully, you cannot actually gain any information in detail from it, which means you don't get any smarter and you're not prepared for the exam. So like, I remember Dr. Barnes saying these words, but he didn't have any context for it. You may say that anyway, but for the most part, I'm trying to convey knowledge to you so you can make better decisions when you take the exam eventually. So I think that's a pretty intuitive approach, and that's the way that we're going to be working in the real world as well. Move on to chapter 2. Which of the following is not a role of accounting function in business? Okay. So again, I said this at the very first class period. Be very, very careful when you see the phrase all of the above, because I want you to get in the habit of when you see all of the above, making sure that you can specifically define whether all of the above is appropriate. So do we use accounting? Do we use it for the financial close? Yeah, that's one of the very first things you learned back in 220, yes. For regulatory compliance? Yeah, we talked about that in class. Compliance of those laws and regulations have to meet. For project management, are people who are managing projects going to want to have financial information to make sure that they're actually meeting their objectives? Yes, okay. Using IT to make financing and accounting processes more efficient? We hope so, okay. Hopefully, that's one thing we want to do over time, is to actually make sure that our processes are actually improving and meeting the changes in the environment. So all of the above are the answers. Now, I know that was a rudimentary one. You probably just circled E and moved on with your life, okay? That will frequently happen with the homework, but I want you to get in the habit of thinking about all of the answers when you see all of the above. Because as I've warned you, there will be all of the above questions on the exam, and they will not always be correct. In fact, they will very frequently be the incorrect answer, because I want you to think about the answers that are being represented. Question number 6. Which of the following symbols represent a gateway in BPMN? So a gateway is what? It's a decision point. Decision point. So how do we actually show a decision point in BPMN diagram? Which one is that? Is that going to be this rectangle here? No, the rectangle represents an activity, correct? Okay. We have the circle here. Circle's not it, but remember, circle, depending on how it's presented, is going to represent an event. All right. If it's a single circle with a non-bold line, that's going to be a starting event. If it's got a bold outside, that's going to be an ending event. If it's got 2 lines for the circle, that's going to be an intermediate event. Then we have this D right here. What is that? That's a flow, an information flow. Okay, so basically, this is where information flows from one point to the other. So it's got to be D right here. That's our decision guideline. By the way, does everybody remember what I said about gateways and what we're going to see moving forward with gateways? So gateways, there should always be 2. We will not see 2 moving forward, which really annoys me. Okay, so in your diagrams of creating BPM diagrams moving forward, whenever you have a decision, please make sure that you consider that a gateway should have a decision creation and a decision end, or decision beginning, decision end. I think that's a good practice to get into, and your employers will probably appreciate that if you have to do that for them as well. Which of the following represent a sequence flow? We just talked about that. Sequence flow is represented by D. Okay. Number 11. Which of the following best describes message flows? Okay. So message flows. So message flows are continuous within each pool. That's not necessarily true because they can move outside of pools. Message flows are modeled with solid arrows. Sometimes they are. Sometimes they're message flows represent exchange between pools. Yes, they can. Okay. So C looks like our answer right now, but it says message flows may not cross pool boundaries. They absolutely can because we can communicate between 2 entities. And message flows may not cross the lane boundaries. They absolutely can as well because we can communicate within departments. So C is the only one that makes sense in this context. All right. Moving back to chapter 1. There are not a lot of questions like this, but I do like it when the questions pop up like this. So no problems. Oh, by the way, please make a note of this. You will notice in the book that we have 3 series and types of questions. So we have our multiple choice questions, which will always be present in the homework. Then we have discussion questions, which were not in this homework assignment, but maybe in future homework assignments. Please make sure that you are clear when I ask for a discussion question versus a problem. And I try to point that out to you, but it still has happened in the past that people have answered a discussion question when they're supposed to answer a problem. So the problems, all right. Match the value chain activities in the left column with scenario in the right column. So let's see. Let's just go through these and see what you got, see if you came up with them, okay? See if they came up correct. So service activities. What service activities represents when an organization provides services to a customer or to a stakeholder. Example of this, if I buy a car, then after I buy the car, there's going to be routine maintenance on that, okay? That would be an example of service activity. What do we call it? What is that thing that I purchased alongside my car that allows me to actually get that work done? A warranty. So warranty work, so B. Then we have inbound logistics, okay? So inbound logistics, that's where we get the materials so we can actually make the products or we can deliver the products to the customers. That's our first step. Where would we get those? Where would we receive those goods? The receiving dock for raw materials? Yeah, okay, it's inbound logistics. All right, marketing and sales activities, So again, marketing and sales, really, really important because we want to know what our customers need, what they desire. What's a good way to actually get information from customers? Yeah, survey. Ask them what it is. Is it, obviously sometimes you do business with customers. Say, would you complete a short survey? It's like, no, my time is too valuable. Click, close. Okay. But if you fill out the survey, they can gain information and they can hopefully better serve you in the future. Or they can put cookies on your computer and then they can track you nonstop. Okay. One of those 2. I'm not going to say which one I prefer more. All right. Firm infrastructure. So the firm infrastructure, again, the organization itself is not just contained within the accounting information system and the operations, all right? We do have people who've got to make strategic planning decisions. We call those management. What are some examples of management in this chart here? CEO, CFO, okay? Then we have human resource management, the hiring and firing of people. So who are those going to be? Well, worker recruitment, probably going to bring some new employees in. I just realized we're running out of time, so I'm going to go through these quickly. Technology should be pretty straightforward, but technology is at its face. It's not just talking about computers. It's about any evolution in existence of operations. So we could say new product development represents a type of technology as well. Procurement. So we'll see that term procurement, and oftentimes it's used synonymously with purchasing. Those two terms can actually be exchanged. So what type of things will we be procuring in this situation? Well, buying, sourcing raw materials. So that would be an example of that. Outbound logistics, that's delivery to the firm's customer. That's basically where we finish the production or we finish the acquisition of goods and we get it to the customer. And then operations. Operations is a little bit sus because there's a lot of different things that can represent operations. But in this particular situation, we're going to call it the assembly line because that's the only thing that's left. Okay. Do one more. When we flipped it around, we actually talk about an operation and there's an activity, and we're going to talk about the scenario. All right. So customer call center, again, customer call center seems to be one of those things that supports the normal operations of the organization. It's like when you order your pizza, if you like order from a pizza place that's got a large surrounding, they may have an operations center where they actually route those pizza deliveries to their store. I don't think that's the case in Kirksville. I think if you call Domino's or Pagliazzi, you just actually call the store itself directly. But some other places may have their call centers. All right. Is that a directly value providing activity? No. But it does support those type of things. So call center would be a service activity, Supply schedules, okay? So this is actually trying to determine when we need to get new goods and services that we're going to send to the customer. We actually have to acquire those before we can do any operations. So that's going to be inbound logistics. Order taking is going to be that sales aspect that we talked about before. So it's going to be marketing and sales activity. Accounting department. I don't know how we call that firm's infrastructure because every accountant I've ever met is much more important than just infrastructure. But yeah, we're gonna assign that with the firm infrastructure right there. Staff training, human resource management, research development. We're gonna call that technology. By the way, you may have noticed that 4 goes to D, 5 goes to E, and 6 goes to F. We're drawing a line straight across. In fact, I think if you just did that for this problem, you got more than half of them correct. So anyway. Verifying the quality of raw materials. Why are we verifying the quality of raw materials? Well, again, as you learned back in 221, if we're going to provide these goods and services to the customers, then we need to make sure that we're providing good goods and services to customers. So we're going to be talking about that from a procurement perspective. The distribution center, that's going to be our outbound logistics, and manufacturing, that's our operations. And I know that I'm really short on time, but I did want to show this diagram real quick to you. We may talk about it a little bit more next week. But you had to do the process of going to class. So the alarm clock buzzes. So you get up, get dressed, eat breakfast, prepare school, and check the weather. You probably had to do that today because there's a 30% chance of rain. I hope you knew that, okay? Because it's looking a little cloudy outside. So if it's going to be rain likely, then you're going to put on your jacket and take your umbrella, drive to school, and then park and walk to class. But if there's no rain in the forecast, you can just basically say no jacket, no umbrella, and you're going to put on the roller skates and skate to class, okay? I don't know if that's still a thing. Maybe it's because I think it's mostly people on this like these long boards that are like skateboards, but like 3 times as long. That's going to be what you do if you don't have rain in the forecast. We'll look at this again a little bit more in detail, but I want you guys to be able to enjoy your Friday. So enjoy your Friday. I'll see you on Wednesday again. Yeah, go right ahead.